I'll let Joe tell you all about using the feedback activity.
Okay, I'm just going to undo that MP3 pod. Now our music's gone. Yep, thank you very much, Colin. Okay, thanks Joe, Nina, Ray and Robin for coming into the first session. As Colin said, today I'm going to be talking about using the feedback activity in eLearn. It is probably something that you have already used before, but what I'm actually going to be talking about is some of the ways that you might be able to use feedback that you hadn't previously thought of. So I'm just going to flick over to a new layout. So everyone should be staying in there, but you've now got the slide headed up using the feedback activity in eLearn. Okay, so just briefly, so what is the feedback activity? Feedback is that activity with the green question mark that we use as a tool for student evaluations. There are templates that are already set up and exist within eLearn that we already have, and it asks a series of questions and will collate the results. It's easy to think about it like a quiz but with no score. So the function is enabling you to be able to ask a question and get a response back from the student, but it's not that they're being graded on it. It's just, as the name suggests, a means of getting feedback from your students. Now, apart from student evaluations, what else can we use the feedback activity for? Well, in my instance, I was set up with an activity or a task to look at ways of improving the recognition process. And so I was in the position that I was asking repeated questions and I wanted to capture the answers from those responses. So I was meeting continually with a person one-on-one and going through the same information and asking these questions over and over again. So I started to think, well, in this situation for recognition, can feedback be an activity that we use it for? And I found that it actually was a really useful tool for this. I'm just trying to get to the next slide. So our standard app or common application of feedback is, as you see here, you've got the question mark which indicates that the type of activity is feedback, and it's usually called the CIT student evaluation, and you might have your subject name that sits within the course. This would be a single feedback tool that sits within your course, usually at the end, where you prompt your students to fill it in and give you that feedback as the teacher. The new application that I've used the tool for is, as you've got detailed here with a list of instructions. There's an instructions on what the students have to do, and what they're actually completing is an individual survey for a single unit of competency and answering the questions for me in eLearn rather than me having to do it verbally. Now, one of the beauties of using feedback is that it has the conditional release feature. Just as a show of hands, how many people have actually heard of conditional release within eLearn? Just if you give me a thumbs up or a smiley face. So yeah, most people are familiar with it. Kerry, I think, is a pretty proficient eLearn user. Even if you haven't used it, most people have heard about it, but it's essentially the ability to be able to direct people to different parts in your eLearn course depending on their responses. So within feedback, if somebody answers yes or no to a particular question, you can direct them to a particular response. And so that meant that for the particular activity of recognition, feedback was really useful. So what I was going to do was just show you a sample of the course that I've actually got set up. So what I'm going to do is just share another screen that I've got where I've actually created this. So in terms of the recognition self-evaluation for hospitality, is that the screen that everyone's able to see?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So what we have got set up is there are buttons that lead to other parts of the CIT website that relate to recognition. And I've also got an area built in with program codes. So part of the conversation that I would have with people would be going through repeatedly the codes and things that they need on their forms. By enabling feedback and an eLearn page, it avoids the need to actually repeat all that information over and over again individually. So I'll go back in again and actually demonstrate using feedback in this exercise. So within here you've got just a descriptor from training.gov.au, and you have an initial question which just asks you generally about the particular subject. So in this case we've got, do you have the ability to demonstrate social awareness when you're serving customers and working with colleagues? If you answer yes, it's going to direct you to an area asking for evidence. If you answer no, it's actually going to recommend that you don't progress with recognition here. Now, another feature of feedback is that you can set up these labels. So it's not only about asking questions, but you've got the ability to tick and indicate information in a label area. When I go next page, it will then direct me to further questions. So you've got the ability to then get a bit more in-depth information, as well as have an open field here where students can type in whatever additional comments they want and then submit their answers. Once they've actually submitted their answers, it will give them a range statement like this that actually tells them some instructions about what to do. So just in terms of that as a demonstration, because these are a quick session, is there any questions in regards to what I've just demonstrated to you there? Okay, Nina, you're typing. Great, thanks Nina. It is something that we've also presented to teacher education because eLearn is an area that a lot of teachers are already familiar with using. It can be something that used internally between teachers we can actually get going quite easily. Okay, great. Now I'm going to flick back to, I'm going to unshare this screen and just come back to my presentation. So now just testing the microphone is still working.
Yep, still good.
Great. Okay, just some helpful hints in regards to this. So, I mean, even though I've used this in the terms of recognition, think about any conversation you may have repeatedly with either individual students or staff. Can something like feedback be useful for you to capture that conversation? So it's worth thinking about. You can also make use of the duplicate function in eLearn once you've set up your first feedback activity. So it's a little bit of work initially to set up that conditional release and direct your questions. But once you've got a format in place, the duplicate feature where you can just ×2 makes it lots easier. Something to be aware of though, when you do duplicate, not all the settings will duplicate. So you need to check each feedback that you've set up when you're creating it to make sure that the settings are going to be consistent. One thing as well, that you're able to look at results by individual. So normally when we use feedback, we collate the results. So we want to find out that 8 students said yes and 5 students said no to a particular question. What you're actually able to do is look at results on a one-on-one basis and capture the name. So you need to ensure that you've got the information as not anonymous. Again, that's probably something we wouldn't normally have when we use feedback for our student evaluations. Okay, that concludes what I'm covering today. If there's any particular questions or comments that anybody has, fantastic. Otherwise, my email address is there. I do work in EdTech, which is the new name for the FlexEd department. Please look me up, get in touch if you wanted to have a look at it in more detail or want to know more about it.